The unexpected decision. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mix of alien languages and translator static. Ambassador David Miller sat quietly in the human section, watching as the various species argued over trade routes and mining rights. The humans have been part of this council for 50 years now, ever since first contact with the Galactic Federation. Today's meeting was different, though. The council members were discussing new regulations that would limit human expansion into Outer Rim territories. They spoke about humans as if they weren't even present, treating Earth's representatives like junior partners who should be grateful for any scraps thrown their way. The human species shows too much aggression, declared Prime Minister Vex of the Altarian Empire, his blue skin shimmering under the chamber lights. Their expansion rate is concerning. We must control their growth. Chancellor Krim from the beetle-like insectoid collective nodded his massive head. Agreed. Humans reproduce too quickly and consume too many resources. They need stricter limits. David listened as speaker after speaker stood up to discuss humanity's problems. They talked about limiting human colonies, reducing trade agreements, and even suggested monitoring Earth's population growth. The worst part was how casually they discussed it, as if humans were pets that needed house training. After 3 hours of this treatment, David stood up slowly. The chamber fell quiet as all eyes turned to him. His fellow human delegates, Captain Ross and Dr. Martinez, looked at him with concern. Honored council members, David began, his voice calm but firm. I've listened to your concerns about humanity. I understand you view us as a problem that needs solving. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was unusual. Humans typically stayed quiet during council sessions. Therefore, David continued, I'm here to inform you that humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Federation, effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the translator devices seemed to pause in shock. Chancellor Krim's antennae twitched nervously. Surely you don't mean complete withdrawal. I mean exactly that, David replied. We're pulling back all human diplomats, ending all trade agreements, and recalling our citizens from Federation space. Humanity will handle its own affairs from now on. Prime Minister Vex leaned forward, his usual arrogance replaced by confusion. But you can't simply leave. The Federation provides protection, trade opportunities, technology sharing. Protection from what? David asked. Trade that benefits everyone except us. Technology sharing where we give more than we receive. He shook his head. We've decided we're better off alone. The room erupted in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species began shouting questions and demands. How could humanity survive without Federation support? What about the trade routes, the defense agreements, the shared research projects? David waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. We've made our decision. Human ships will begin leaving Federation space within the week. We wish you all the best. As the human delegation walked out, the chamber fell into stunned silence. For 50 years, the Federation had taken humanity's contributions for granted, while treating them as second-class citizens. Now, suddenly, the humans were gone. Within hours, the news spread across the galaxy. Humanity had walked away from the most powerful alliance in known space. Many species laughed at what they saw as human stupidity. Others began to worry about what this might mean. On Earth, the announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some humans were scared about losing galactic protection. Others were relieved to be free from alien control. But most were simply curious about what would happen next. The Federation leadership held emergency meetings throughout the night. They had never faced a situation like this before. Member species didn't just leave. They couldn't survive on their own. The galaxy was too dangerous, too complex, too interconnected for any single species to go it alone. They'll be back, declared Prime Minister Vex during one such meeting. Humans are emotional creatures. Once they realize their mistake, they'll come crawling back, begging to rejoin. But Chancellor Krim wasn't so sure. He had studied human history and knew they were capable of surprising things when pushed too far. What if they don't come back? He asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. What would the Federation do if humanity actually meant what they said? What would happen to the galaxy if one of its most innovative and determined species simply left? As Earth's ships began powering up their engines and human colonies started packing their belongings, the galaxy was about to learn the answer to that question. And many species were beginning to suspect they wouldn't like what they discovered. The first cracks. 3 months had passed since humanity's dramatic exit from the Galactic Federation, and the first signs of trouble were starting to show. What had initially been dismissed as a human temper tantrum was beginning to look like something much more serious. Admiral Thorne of the Federation Defense Fleet sat in his command center, staring at reports that made less sense each day. Pirate attacks along the Outer Rim had increased by 300%. Trade routes that had been safe for decades were now dangerous highways where merchant ships disappeared without a trace. "Where are the human patrol ships?" asked his aide, Lieutenant Commander Vale, a tall gray-skinned officer from the neutral zone. "Gone," Thorne replied grimly. "All of them. Every human vessel has been recalled to their own space." The truth was becoming clear to those who paid attention. For 50 years, human ships had been quietly patrolling the most dangerous parts of Federation space. While other species focused on profitable core systems, humans had volunteered for the boring, dangerous work of keeping the frontier safe. They had done it so efficiently that most people forgot they were doing it at all. Now those same frontier regions were becoming lawless wastelands. Pirate fleets that had been kept in check by constant human pressure were growing bold. Criminal organizations were setting up bases in areas that used to be regularly patrolled. The economic effects were even worse. Dr. Ellis, the Federation's chief trade analyst, had spent weeks trying to understand why certain supply chains were falling apart. The answer, when it finally came, was simple and terrifying. Humans had been the galaxy's middlemen. They were the ones willing to trade with everyone, even species that other races found distasteful or dangerous. They were the diplomats who could somehow get insectoids to work with reptilians, who could convince proud warrior clans to accept help from peaceful agricultural worlds. Without human traders acting as neutral parties, old conflicts were flaring up again. Species that had cooperated for decades through human mediation were now refusing to deal with each other directly. Trade routes were closing. Prices were rising. Entire sectors were becoming economically isolated. Prime Minister Vex called another emergency council session, but this time the mood was very different from 3 months ago. Instead of confident discussions about controlling humanity, there was nervous energy and barely concealed panic. "The situation is temporary," Vex announced to the assembled delegates. "These problems will resolve themselves once the market adjusts." But even as he spoke, reports were coming in that made his words sound hollow. The Mining Guild was reporting severe shortages of rare metals, metals that human colonies had been quietly supplying for decades. The Research Consortium had lost access to critical data that human scientists had been sharing freely. The Agricultural Alliance was facing crop failures because human farming techniques were no longer available. Chancellor Krim raised a disturbing question during a private meeting after the session. "What if we underestimated them?" he asked Vex quietly. "What if humans weren't just another member species? What if they were actually essential?" Vex dismissed the idea, but privately he was beginning to have doubts. His intelligence sources were reporting strange activities in human space. Instead of collapsing without Federation support, human colonies seemed to be thriving. They were trading with each other, sharing resources, and even expanding into new territories. More worrying were the reports of other species trying to establish contact with humanity directly. The proud warrior clans, who usually looked down on weak diplomatic species, were sending envoys to human space. The mysterious trader guilds, who rarely dealt with anyone outside their own kind, were offering exclusive contracts to human merchants. It seemed that without the Federation as a middleman, many species were discovering they actually preferred dealing with humans directly. Humans were fair, reliable, and didn't try to impose their values on others. They were also remarkably good at solving problems that other species found impossible. The most alarming report came from the Outer Rim territories. A massive criminal alliance had formed, threatening to destabilize the entire region. The Federation had sent 3 separate military expeditions to deal with the problem. All 3 had failed miserably. Then, mysteriously, the criminal alliance suddenly collapsed overnight. Intelligence reports suggested that human mercenary groups had somehow convinced the various criminal factions to turn on each other. The humans hadn't fired a single shot. They had simply talked to the right people and offered better alternatives. As these reports piled up on Vex's desk, an uncomfortable truth was becoming clear. The galaxy hadn't been doing humanity a favor by including them in the Federation. Humanity had been doing the galaxy a favor by staying. And now they were gone. The domino effect. 6 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Federation was facing its worst crisis in centuries. What had started as isolated problems were now cascading failures that threatened the very foundation of galactic civilization. Ambassador Korath of the Stellar Republic stood before the emergency assembly, his usually calm demeanor cracked with desperation. "Fellow delegates," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "we can no longer ignore the reality of our situation. The Federation is falling apart." The evidence was overwhelming. The Merchant Alliance had lost 60% of its trade volume. The defense fleet was stretched so thin that entire systems were going unprotected. Research projects that had taken decades to develop were being abandoned as key components became unavailable. But the most shocking development was happening at the diplomatic level. Species that had been Federation members for centuries were beginning to question their loyalty. The maritime worlds had already suspended their membership fees. The forest planets were threatening to withdraw entirely. Even the ancient crystal entities, founding members of the Federation, were making uncomfortable noises about restructuring their commitments. Dr. Kane, head of the Federation's Economic Council, presented a report that sent chills through the assembly. "The numbers don't lie," she said, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. "Human colonies produced 40% of our rare materials, handled 60% of our interspecies trade, and provided the majority of our frontier security. We didn't realize it because they did it so quietly." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For 50 years, humanity had been the invisible foundation holding the Federation together. They had been the species everyone could trust, the negotiators everyone would accept, the traitors everyone would deal with. Without them, the careful balance of galactic politics was collapsing. Prime Minister Vex, who had been so confident about humanity's eventual return, now looked haggard and desperate. His own Altarian empire was facing internal rebellions as trade routes collapsed and resources became scarce. "We need to bring them back," he admitted quietly, "whatever it takes." But bringing humanity back was proving more difficult than anyone had imagined. Every attempt at contact was politely but firmly rejected. Human diplomats would accept messages but wouldn't agree to meetings. Human traders would sell essential supplies, but only at market prices with no special Federation discounts. Human military units offered mercenary services, but refused to rejoin the defense fleet. Meanwhile, disturbing reports were coming in about what humanity was doing in their own space. Far from collapsing without Federation support, human civilization was expanding and thriving. They had formed new alliances with species the Federation had ignored or rejected. They were pioneering technologies that Federation scientists hadn't even considered. They were exploring regions of space that had been deemed too dangerous or unprofitable. Captain Rex of the Border Patrol brought the most alarming news of all. "They're not just surviving," he reported to the Military Council. "They're growing stronger. Human fleets are bigger than they were 6 months ago. Their colonies are more prosperous. And they're attracting allies we never expected." The list of species now allied with humanity was shocking. The fierce nomad clans, who had never joined any alliance, were now working closely with human explorers. The mysterious deep space entities, who rarely communicated with anyone, were sharing ancient knowledge with human researchers. Even the proud warrior houses, traditional Federation allies, were signing defense pacts with human military commanders. It was becoming clear that humanity hadn't needed the Federation. The Federation had needed humanity. Without human mediation, old rivalries were flaring up. Without human trade networks, economic cooperation was breaking down. Without human security forces, dangerous regions were becoming no-go zones. The final blow came when the Outer Rim territories formally requested to leave Federation space and join the growing human alliance. These were regions that the Federation had spent centuries trying to integrate and control. Now they were voluntarily choosing to align with the species that had supposedly walked away in a tantrum. Chancellor Krim called for an emergency closed session with only the senior leadership present. "We need to face the truth," he said, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's dim lighting. "We made the biggest mistake in Federation history. We treated our most valuable members like second-class citizens until they decided they didn't need us anymore." The question now wasn't whether the Federation could survive without humanity. It was becoming clear they couldn't. The question was whether humanity could be convinced to save them, and what price they would demand for their return. As reports continued to flow in about the Federation's declining power and humanity's growing influence, one fact was becoming undeniable. The galaxy had changed forever, and the humans were no longer asking for permission to exist. They were thriving on their own terms, leaving the Federation to face the consequences of taking them for granted. Desperate measures. 1 year after humanity's departure, the Galactic Federation was on the brink of complete collapse. The Emergency Council session was unlike any in the organization's 1,000-year history. Half the normal delegates were missing, either because their species had withdrawn or because they couldn't afford to send representatives anymore. Prime Minister Vex stood at the podium, his blue skin now pale with stress and his usual arrogance replaced by barely contained panic. "Fellow delegates," he began, his voice hoarse from weeks of crisis meetings, "we face extinction as a galactic power. The Federation cannot continue without humanity's return." The statistics were devastating. Federation membership had dropped from 847 species to 312. Trade volume had collapsed by 80%. The defense fleet was down to less than a quarter of its original strength. Entire sectors of space were now lawless regions where Federation authority meant nothing. But the most humiliating development was the rise of the human Commonwealth. What had started as a simple withdrawal had evolved into a competing galactic power that was attracting Federation members at an alarming rate. The Commonwealth operated on principles that seemed to work better than anything the Federation had tried. Genuine equality between species, voluntary cooperation instead of imposed regulations, and fair trade that benefited everyone involved. Chancellor Krim presented intelligence reports that painted a picture of human success that was hard to believe. "Human colonies have tripled in number," he reported. "Their military strength has increased 5-fold. Their technology advancement rate is unprecedented. And most troubling of all, they seem genuinely happy." The last point stung the most. Intercepted communications from human space showed a society that was thriving without the Federation's guidance. Humans were exploring freely, trading fairly, and building alliances based on mutual respect rather than political necessity. They had created exactly the kind of galactic civilization that the Federation claimed to represent. Ambassador Vorth of the warrior clans, one of the few traditional allies still present, delivered the final blow. "My people have decided," he announced. "We are formally requesting to join the human Commonwealth. Their offer of alliance is more honorable than anything the Federation has provided in centuries." The chamber erupted in shocked protests, but Vorth continued calmly. "Humans treat us as equals. They don't lecture us about our warrior culture or try to change our ways. They simply ask for fair dealing and mutual defense. It is everything the Federation promised but never delivered." As Vorth walked out, followed by 3 other delegations, the remaining members were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Federation had been built on the idea that advanced civilizations needed complex rules and hierarchies to cooperate. Humanity had proven that wrong by creating a system based on simple respect and voluntary participation. Prime Minister Vex called for a private meeting of the remaining senior leadership. Only 12 delegates attended, down from the usual 50. The meeting was held in a small side chamber, symbolic of how much the Federation had shrunk. "We need to swallow our pride," Vex said bluntly. "We need to go to humanity and beg them to return." The word beg hung in the air like a curse. These were species that had ruled the galaxy for centuries, that had considered themselves the peak of civilized development. Now they were talking about begging the species they had dismissed as junior partners. Dr. Kane, whose economic projections grew more dire each week, spoke up. "What can we offer them? They have everything they need. Their economy is stronger than ours. Their military is more effective. Their society is more stable. What do we have that they want?" The question was met with silence. Humanity had built something better than the Federation, and they had done it in just 1 year. They had taken all the Federation's best ideas and improved on them while discarding all the bureaucracy and prejudice that had held the old system back. Chancellor Krim made the suggestion that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to voice. Maybe we should join them instead of asking them to rejoin us. The idea was shocking but logical. The human commonwealth was everything the Federation had claimed to be. It was democratic, fair, prosperous, and peaceful. It protected the weak without oppressing the strong. It encouraged trade without exploitation. It maintained security without tyranny. As the meeting ended, each delegate faced the same realization. The galaxy had moved on without them. Humanity hadn't just left the Federation. They had made it obsolete. The species that had once been dismissed as too young and too aggressive had shown the rest of the galaxy how civilization was supposed to work. The Federation's leaders were about to discover that getting humanity back wouldn't be about negotiating terms or offering concessions. It would be about admitting that they had been wrong about everything, and that the students had become the teachers in the span of a single year. The new galaxy. 2 years after humanity's departure from the Galactic Federation, the transformation of galactic civilization was complete. The Federation's Emergency Council met for what everyone knew would be the final time in the organization's history. Only 47 species remained as members, and most of those were expected to leave within the month. Prime Minister Vex, now representing one of the last holdout civilizations, stood before the nearly empty chamber. His once proud Altarian empire was facing economic collapse and internal rebellion. His choice was simple: dissolve the Federation and petition to join the human commonwealth, or watch his own civilization crumble. "The motion before us today," Vex announced with bitter irony, "is the formal dissolution of the Galactic Federation and our collective petition to join the human commonwealth." The vote was unanimous. After 1,000 years of galactic dominance, the Federation was voting itself out of existence. Within hours of the announcement, human diplomatic ships arrived at the former Federation capital. But instead of conquerors claiming victory, they came as helpful neighbors offering assistance with the transition. The lead ambassador was Captain Torres, a middle-aged woman whose calm professionalism stood in sharp contrast to the panic that had characterized Federation leadership for the past 2 years. "The Commonwealth welcomes all species who wish to join us on equal terms," Torres announced to the assembled delegates. "But joining us means accepting our principles: voluntary cooperation, genuine equality, and mutual respect. We won't force anyone to change their ways, but we also won't tolerate the old Federation habits of hierarchy and prejudice." The terms were surprisingly generous. Former Federation species could maintain their governments, their cultures, and their territories. They would have full voting rights in Commonwealth decisions. They would receive immediate access to improved trade networks, better security arrangements, and advanced technologies that humanity had developed during their independence. The only requirement was accepting the Commonwealth Charter, a document that was remarkably simple compared to the Federation's thousands of pages of regulations. It essentially boiled down to three principles: treat others as equals, keep your agreements, and settle disputes through dialogue rather than force. Chancellor Krim, representing the Insectoid Collective, was among the first to sign. "This is how the Federation should have operated from the beginning," he admitted. "Humans understood something we didn't, that true strength comes from willing cooperation, not imposed authority." The integration process revealed just how much the galaxy had changed. Human space was no longer the frontier region that Federation species had dismissed. It had become the center of galactic civilization, with Earth serving as the diplomatic and cultural heart of a new kind of alliance. The transformation went beyond politics and economics. Human influence had fundamentally changed how different species related to each other. The old patterns of dominant and subordinate races were being replaced by partnerships based on complementary strengths. Warrior species provided security, intellectual species contributed research, industrial species handled manufacturing, and trading species managed distribution, all working together as equals rather than in hierarchy. Ambassador Torres addressed the final integration ceremony, which was attended by representatives from over 1,500 species, nearly double the Federation's membership at its peak. The human commonwealth had succeeded not by conquering or controlling, but by offering something better. 2 years ago, humanity left the Federation because we were tired of being treated as junior partners, Torres said. "We never intended to replace the Federation. We just wanted to build something better for ourselves. But it turns out that when you create a system based on respect and fairness, others want to join you." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The species that had been dismissed as too young and too aggressive had become the galaxy's moral leaders. The civilization that had been told to slow down and accept limits had shown everyone else how to reach their full potential. Prime Minister Vex, now serving as the Altarian representative to the Commonwealth Council, reflected on the changes. "We thought we were teaching humanity how to be civilized," he said during his integration speech. "Instead, they taught us what civilization actually means." The galaxy that emerged from this transformation was unrecognizable from the one that had existed under Federation rule. Trade flourished because it was genuinely fair. Conflicts decreased because disputes were resolved through mediation rather than power politics. Exploration accelerated because resources weren't hoarded by dominant species. Technology advanced faster because knowledge was shared freely rather than controlled by bureaucracies. As the integration ceremonies concluded and the new Commonwealth flag was raised over the former Federation capital, one thing was clear: humanity hadn't just walked away from the galaxy's leadership. They had shown everyone what real leadership looked like, and the galaxy was better for it. The species that had once been told they were too dangerous to be trusted with power had proven that true power came from earning trust, not demanding it.